To continue from the last video, so we can actually change the position of the mesenteries. With any elongation of the digestive tract, position of the mesenteries do change. Some of the segments of the tract become fixed. Segments of the mesentery proper come into contact and fuse together. And much of the mesocolon is going to fuse to the dorsal body wall. Moving deeper into the system, let's talk about the stomach. It's a muscular, expandable, J-shaped organ, 3 layers in the muscular layer. The stomach's highly variable in its shape depending on the contents. When it's empty, it's a muscular tube with constricted lumen. When it's full, it can expand to 1 to 1.5 liters of material, which we call chyme. It's viscous, highly acidic, a soupy mixture formed from the combination of food, saliva, and gastric gland secretions. The lesser curvature forms the medial surface that's attached to the mesentery of the lesser omentum. The greater curvature forms the lateral and inferior surfaces that's attached to the mesentery of the greater omentum. The specific stomach regions include the fundus, which is the superior area, superior to the junction between the stomach and the esophagus. And then the cardia, superior medial portion with 3 centimeters of gastroesophageal junction. It secretes mucus to protect the esophagus from the stomach acid and enzymes. Then the main body, which is the largest region. It's between the fundus and the pylorus. It functions as a mixing bowl. And then, of course, the pylorus, which is this J-curved area. It frequently changes shape with the mixing movements. There's a picture of an actual cadaver showing those parts of the stomach. If we look at the layers of the muscularis externa, you see there is an oblique layer internally. It strengthens the stomach wall. It assists in mixing and churning to form the chyme. Then we have a circular layer and then a longitudinal layer. Within the stomach, on that inner lining, you see folds, temporary mucosal folds we call rugae, the wrinkles. They allow gastric expansion by flattening out with stomach expansion. The pyloric antrum is a portion connected to the stomach body. The pyloric canal empties into the duodenum of the small intestine. The pyloric sphincter is a smooth muscle band that regulates the release of chyme into the duodenum. And then the pyloric orifice is the stomach outlet. The stomach has several functions. It temporarily stores the ingested food. It mechanically digests the ingested food. It chemically digests the food through the action of acids and enzymes. And it produces something called intrinsic factor. If we look at the layers of the stomach, we have this most outer layer called the mucosa, well, really inner, if we're going from the inner part of the stomach, composed of the simple columnar cells. It produces a layer of alkaline mucus. It protects epithelial cells against the acid and enzymes in the gastric lumen. The lifespan of the gastric epithelial cell is only 3 to 7 days, so it turns over very quickly. Okay, then we have the submucosa, then the muscular layer. It's oblique, circular, and longitudinal layers. And then we move finally to the serosa. The gastric glands are glands that are in the fundus in the body, and they secrete most of the acid enzymes that enable gastric digestion. They're dominated by parietal cells and chief cells, and they secrete 1.5 liters of gastric juice each day. The glands in the pylorus secrete mucus and hormones that coordinate and control digestive activity. Gastric pits are shallow depressions that we find that open onto the gastric surface. Active stem cells at the base of each pit replace the superficial cells when they're shed into the chyme, and each pit communicates with several gastric glands. The cells of the gastric glands include the parietal cells that secrete intrinsic factor, which we mentioned earlier. It's a glycoprotein that helps in vitamin B12 absorption. We also have hydrochloric acid that is secreted by the parietal cells that activates pepsinogen, and it keeps the stomach at pH of 1.5 to 2. Extremely acidic. The G cells or also called enteroendocrine cells, produce a variety of hormones. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen. It's activated by the hydrochloric acid to become pepsin, which is an active proteolytic enzyme. It digests proteins. Newborns also produce renin and gastric lipase. These are enzymes that are important for the digestion of milk. So you may ask yourself, where does the hydrochloric acid come from? And the parietal cells do not create HCl in their cytoplasm because it would destroy the cell itself. I mean, 1.5 to 2 pH is extremely low and corrosive. Hydrogen and chlorine ions are transported and secreted separately. So the hydrogen ion is generated as carbonic anhydrase converts the CO2 and H2O to carbonic acid. And carbonic acid dissociates into bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions. So this is one of the buffering systems in the body. The bicarbonate ejected into the interstitial fluid and is being ejected to exchange for chloride ion. And from the interstitial fluid, bicarbonate enters the bloodstream. If the gastric glands are very active, the amount of bicarbonate released is enough to increase the pH of the blood. A sudden influx of bicarbonate ions is called the alkaline tide. Chloride ions diffuse across the cell and they exit into the lumen of the gastric gland. The hydrogen ions are also actively transported into the gastric gland lumen. Moving on to the intestine. So the intestinal tract is specialized to absorb nutrients, as you very well know. Many intestinal structures add surface area to increase absorption. And we often see these circular folds. It's a series of transverse folds along the intestinal lining. It's a permanent feature. There's roughly 800 folds in the small intestine, and most of this is in the jejunum of the small intestine. Intestinal villi are finger-like projections of the mucosa, and it's covered by epithelial cells. Surfaces are covered with microvilli, so even smaller projections. and the intestinal glands are located at the bases of the villi. Near the base, stem cells divide and produce epithelial cells. And Paneth cells at the base have a role in innate immunity. They release defensins and lysozyme. The internal structure of a villus has an extensive capillary network in the lamina propria. It carries absorbed nutrients to the hepatic portal circulation. A lymphatic capillary, also called a lacteal, transports materials that cannot enter the blood capillaries. Some examples: absorbed fatty acids assembled into protein lipid packages, or chylomicrons that are too large to diffuse into the bloodstream. And they're transported by the lymphatic system to venous circulation. Smooth muscle in the muscularis mucosae and within the villi move the villi back and forth, and it exposes the surfaces to the intestinal contents. This squeezes the lacteals, and this assists in the lymph movement. We have what are called brush borders that are carpets of microvilli on the surface of the epithelial cells, seen here. It increases the surface area for absorption. It contains enzymes that digest materials. And the epithelial cells can then absorb breakdown products. So the small intestine plays obviously a key role in nutrient digestion and absorption. 90% of nutrient absorption occurs in the small intestine. Most of the remaining 10% occurs in the large intestine. Average overall length of the small intestine, 6 meters or 19.7 feet. The diameter can range from 1.6 inches at the stomach to about 1 inch near the large intestine. And there's 3 segments of the small intestine: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And this is seen here in this graphic. You see the duodenum is found here, right at the right lumbar region, and part of it in the epigastric and the right hypochondriac, moving onto the umbilical. Then the jejunum is in this middle circular area of right lumbar, umbilical, and left lumbar. And then the ileum is pretty much all the lower areas. The duodenum is 10 inches in length. It's a segment closest to the stomach, and it acts as a mixing bowl. It receives chyme from the stomach and digestive secretions from the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. It's mostly retroperitoneal. The duodenal glands produce mucus secretions. It has few circular folds and small villi. And the main function here at the duodenum is to neutralize the acidic chyme. At the jejunum, which is between the duodenum and ileum, it's marked by a sharp bend at the beginning, about 8.2 feet in length. It's in the peritoneal cavity. It has many circular folds and abundant long villi. And because of that, you might realize absorption is very important here. This is where the majority of chemical digestion and nutrient absorption do occur. The ileum is the final segment of the small intestine. It's about 11.5 feet in length. It ends at the ileocecal valve, which is a sphincter that controls the flow from the ileum into the cecum of the large intestine. It has very few circular folds, none at the distal portion, and the villi are relatively stumpy. The submucosa contains aggregated lymphoid nodules.